This happened to me on a weekend getaway I had taken last year back in 2023. What happened, I still think about and angers me to this day. I feel lucky that I'm able to tell you this story, as it could have ended so much differently. I was out hiking as I do every year for a long weekend getaway. Usually I go with friends, but occasionally I'll venture out alone. This was one of those times I'd indeed ventured out by myself. It was somewhere I had hiked and camped before, local to where I lived. My first day was spent exploring and relaxing. Having built up an appetite from a long afternoon, I had set up my campsite and began to prepare something to eat. I didn't settle for a packed lunch and took fresh ingredients as I loved cooking out in the open. So, as I sat making my food, I could hear the sound of footsteps approaching in the distance. Looking up, it was then I could see a man approaching me. Now, it wasn't uncommon to see other hikers or campers, obviously, but with him approaching me from behind, heading over to me, I was, of course, cautious. As the man neared, I could see a smile on his face as he waved over. "Hi there, sorry to intrude. I'm just making my way through looking for a good campsite. My name's John, nice to meet you," he had said as he reached his hand out to shake mine. Standing up, I accepted the handshake as we exchanged a few words. John then proceeded to tell me how he was beat and needed to stop for a rest to recharge the batteries for 5, and wanted to know if I would be so kind as to let him share a seat at my campsite for a moment, whilst he gathered his energy. With him seeming like a nice enough guy, I accepted, and let him have a seat as I offered him a beer, to his delight. As we sat sharing a beer, we talked normal chit-chat about the outdoors, camping, and if he'd ever been here before. The conversation was going well, until I started to get a strange vibe from John. After the conversation of camping died down, there was a period of awkward silence, where John would just stare at me and smile. With the conversation having dried up, I looked to start up another conversation as I sipped my beer, asking John where he was from. It was then I felt a sense of unease build inside of me. As I asked the question, the smile dropped from John's face, as he just stared at me with a hardened, frowned look in his eyes. With no exaggeration, this lasted from a good 30 seconds, which at the time felt like forever, until I uncomfortably asked if he was okay. He continued to stare until he sternly said, "Do you always ask such personal questions?" Personal questions? I thought I only asked where he was from. Feeling the tension, I apologized, saying I didn't mean any offense if I'd caused it. As again, John just stared back at me, feeling uncomfortable and ready to wrap this awkward encounter up. It was then the angered look vanished from John's face as a smile again broke out as he howled laughing, saying he was just messing and winding me up. I remember not being too pleased with the joke, as I half-heartedly chuckled back. John proceeded to tell me he was from all over, and he was just traveling and passing through. He went wherever he needed to be, whatever that meant. The conversation again died out as John again stared at me. I continued to work my fire, thinking what the fuck was this guy's deal? Not wanting to have his company any longer, I stated I needed to go get some more firewood, hoping that would speed up the process. And sure enough, it worked. Finally, he chugged the rest of his beer, as he stood up, thanking me for the drink, and that he must get going now. Like music to my ears, I was more than happy to see him leave. What a weird encounter, I thought, as I watched him walk off into the distance after saying our goodbyes. Later that night, as I finished up my dinner and turned in for the night, I couldn't help but have a sweep of the area, after my strange encounter earlier that afternoon. Just to make sure. You know how your mind gets carried away sometimes. With nothing but the wilderness around me, I was finally content, and made my way into my tent. I must have begun to drift off pretty quick as something woke me. I looked at my watch and it was 1:26, just over half an hour since I had turned in for the night. Curious to what woke me, I listened to my surroundings as outside the tent, I could have swore I had heard the sound of shuffling. Was something out there? An animal? Or worse, as my mind was thinking, was someone out there? I unzipped the tent and stepped out with my hunting knife. Looking around, I couldn't see anything. There was no sign of an animal or anyone. Looking for tracks or prints, I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. As I conceded I was dreaming and thought I had heard the noises, I headed back into my tent, lying my head back down and trying to rest for the next day. Slowly drifting off again, it wasn't long before I again shot up, but this time a surge of terror and fear coursing through me, the smell of smoke filling my nose. As I looked forward and could see the front of my tent was on fire as the flames began to spread and engulf the shelter I laid in. My heart racing, my hand searching rapidly for my knife as I clasped it in my hand, turning, plunging it through the back of the tent, ripping it open as fast as I could, as I threw myself out, coughing as I inhaled the smoke and fumes of melting polyester. All these thoughts spiraling in my mind. What the fuck had happened? Standing and running to grab the pot of water I had left out, it was then I saw it had been tipped over. Looking around, it was then I saw the outline of someone running away, back into the shadows of the forest. Someone had done this. This was done on purpose, and then it hit. I knew it was John from earlier that day. My tent and belongings engulfed in flames as I battled to put it out. I couldn't believe it. That psycho had tried to burn me alive as I slept. The fear I had inside me was replaced by anger. That despicable and soulless act was, I'm sure, meant to have killed me. That night, I searched for the man, but had no luck finding him as he was long gone. He could have been anywhere, and all I knew was that his name was supposedly John. I reported the crime to the police, and filed a report giving as much detail as I could about him. Nothing ever came of it, and no suspect was ever brought forward. After that experience, I never fall into the trap of being so hospitable to strangers I come across whilst camping now. You can never be sure of who you welcome into your campsite, and what their true intentions are. My love for hiking and camping will never go away, but on a recent camping trip I had taken, it turned into something of a nightmare, and I truly got more than I bargained for, making me realize there is some messed up things that can happen out there in the world, and some haunting mysteries that can lie within the sanctuary of our forests around the world. I decided to go on a camping trip alone. I've done this most of my life, hiking, exploring new places and just enjoying nature. It's my way of switching off and taking the time to relax with my own thoughts. There's something special about being one with nature. In my country we're lucky. We're not short of forests to explore, and on this trip I decided to go back to a forest I'd been to many times before. With it being so vast, no two trips were ever the same. Having set out on my journey, I arrived within a few hours, excited to start my adventure. The drive was not overly far, just a few hours out of state. The weather was complementing to my trip, and it worked out well with it being sunny but mild, not too hot and overbearing for a hike, which was great. Late spring to early summer was always a good time to go camping before the heat waves kicked in. Halfway into my journey, I'd been scaling the routes I was pretty familiar with, and being deep into the depths of the forest, at that point I decided to set up camp where I was. Initially surveying the area before pitching my tent, and making the secluded clearing my campsite for the night. Having finished setting up, I decided to go and explore the area, and do a bit of hiking with the intention of gathering some wood for the fire on my way back to site. Hoisting my rucksack up onto my back, I headed out for a brief exploration. As I wandered through the chambers of the forest, I made mental notes of the direction and area I was in, so I knew my way back to campsite. As I explored my surroundings, I stumbled upon a stream where I took a moment to just take it all in, and switch my mind off, as I just basked in its beauty. Having sat for a while, I had checked my watch, noticing that time was escaping me, and it was about time I should head back. So as I headed back, I looked out for good pieces of firewood. As I gathered some wood, I reached a point where there was a steep ditch, leaning to the side as I was picking up a sturdy piece of wood, and it was then something caught my eye down in the ditch. Looking down in front of me, I could see what looked to be some sort of black cloth slightly sticking out of the unearthed soil. Making my way down the slope to inspect, it looked as if an animal had tried to dig up the soil, with what looked to be scratch marks in the earth. As I closed in, I could see that it was indeed some fraying material that was sticking out of the ground. I began to dig up the soil around it with my hands as I unearthed the nylon material. I started to tug at it as the mysterious object started to become loose. Again, going back to the soil and removing a bit more around it, I managed to get the wriggle room I needed as the object finally began to come out. And as I pulled at the handle I had dug up, I could see that it was a duffel bag. As I pulled away, yanking at the bag, it finally came out of the ground, and in all fairness, it was quite big, like 40 by 30 inches. My first thought was, what was in this bag, and why was it buried in the middle of a forest? With thoughts running through my mind, like could it be money or drugs or something else like that? Curiosity filled me. I placed the bag down as I knelt down beside it, when I noticed the zippers had a lock on it. It looked like a basic lock that could be broken off. As I rummaged through my bag, I pulled out my trusted multi-tooled knife and flipped it as it turned into pliers. As I squeezed away trying to break the lock, and it didn't take long as I'd soon snapped the lock off. Curious to see what was inside, I wasted no more time unzipping the bag, but as I did, I wasn't ready for what I saw. What lay in the bag was the sight of a chopped up torso. Falling back in shock, I kicked the bag away. The smell that had released itself from the bag and had settled in my nostrils instantly made me heave as I covered my nose and mouth, trying to evade the smell as my eyes watered. My heart was racing as I stood up, looking at the decaying contents in the bag. Had I really just discovered a dead body? I asked myself in shock, not quite believing what I had found. I didn't know what to do. I was in the middle of the forest alone, and had found what was most probably the remains of a hideous crime. I couldn't just close my eyes on what I found, but I couldn't carry what I'd found out of the forest either. The only thing I could think to do was contact the police and tell them what I'd discovered. So that's what I did. What happened next was an investigation into everything revolving around the bag and its horrific content. I was heavily interrogated, with being the one who found the bag. So much so, I kind of wished I'd never reported it, or even found it for my own sanity. Discovering something like that is crazy, and it messes with your head, to be honest, and leaves you with so many questions. You can't prepare yourself for finding something like that, but thankfully I was cleared of all suspicion. Today, I still don't think the case has been solved, and I don't know if it ever will be. It's scary to think what dark things happen out there, in the remoteness of a forest. Thank you for joining us and watching this chilling video. We hope you enjoyed this topic and you found the fear within. What other subjects would you like to hear soon? Let us know in the comments what creeps you out. If you're new here, say hello, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Become a part of the Horror Motives world. See you soon with another terrifying video.